A lot of indigenous healers go through these sort of shamanic initiations. For me, I didn't view it as that. It just was like a traumatic, scary, eye-opening, disorienting experience. I wasn't going through a process where I was trying to become a shamanic healer. I was just living my life and working with the medicines in my sincere way, trying to do my personal work. But this situation kind of overtook me in a very intense way. And so luckily I had the support of people who, through their practices and technologies and the way that they work with plant medicines and how they're able to work energetically as well. And so it was not little by little. I was very lost and very adrift, unable to find myself. And then it was through the assistance of these two brothers, these healers, that I was able to come back.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Psychedelic Conversations. Today, I have a returning guest, Lee Kaiser. Thank you so much for being with us. Welcome.
Thanks, Susan. Thank you for having me. It's good to be back.
Yes, absolutely. There was so much more that left out from our last conversation that I wanted to unpack a bit more. And I'm really appreciating that you came back to spend more time with us.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to come back and dive a little deeper into some of the things that we began to open up and explore together in our first conversation that we had with Maria.
Yes, absolutely. So, for our listeners, in case you are meeting Lee for the first time, Lee and Maria Garnett, they were our guest a while back. And the reason I wanted to speak with you both was because of the webinar, When the Ceremony Doesn't End. That was the title of the webinar. And very interesting webinar and very interesting speakers and people that are in the space. I thought that it was really critical and important at this time when plant medicines are becoming very mainstream. I feel like there is so much more that we don't know yet. And especially with your experience, Lee, I really want to talk to you from your personal perspective. But before that, I just want to introduce you to our guests or listeners again. You're a wildlife biologist, plant medicine explorer. So you worked as a wildlife biologist for several years in Latin America and immersed yourself in lifestyle oriented around plant medicines. And you had 2 episodes of an experience with ayahuasca, I believe, right? That lasted quite a while. And right now, you are living in Argentina with your partner and traveling and collaborating with the communities and affiliated projects. So if there's anything else you'd like to add with your current projects and what you are doing currently would be helpful.
Sure, yeah. Well, currently, I mean, as you mentioned, I went through 2 episodes of extended sort of psychosis. With just like you mentioned, the name of the webinar that I helped organize with Maria was called When the Ceremony Doesn't End, and that was essentially what my experience was, is that I participated in plant medicine ceremonies, and I didn't come back to my normal state of consciousness. I was in a very altered, dissociative state where there was amnesia. I didn't remember what I was going through. I didn't remember who I was and kind of wasn't myself. And the first time it happened, actually, just to clarify, was with ayahuasca, as you said. The second time it happened was after a peyote ceremony, in fact. And that was in Mexico, the second time this happened to me. And so now, after this happened, the first time it was 7 years ago, almost exactly, in fact. And the second time it happened, it was a little over 4 years ago. And since then, I haven't been working with any plant medicines, any psychotropic substances or plants. Um, I work with other types of ceremonies and medicines. I live in Argentina, as you mentioned, so yerba mate is in every household, and I do cacao ceremonies with my partner. We do sweat lodges, temazcal ceremonies. And so I do participate in kind of altered states of consciousness in some ways. I do a lot of breath work and different types of practices, but I don't work with any psychedelic compounds currently. And I haven't since this second episode happened, just in order to be cautious and to take care of my mental health and not to take any risks. It's been also the consultation and advice I've gotten from different practitioners and healers, and um, as well as the indigenous people who helped assist and take care of me after this happened, in both situations. And so, yeah, living in Argentina now, a lot of the work I've been doing is more just in community kind of grassroots projects. And so I do a lot of gardening and farming and working with local groups. And we have a lot of families and musicians and artists and people here who have their own little entrepreneurial projects. And so I do a lot of just kind of intercultural exchange. That's a lot of the time that I spend here is in the markets and in local kind of gatherings and helping. I play music in an Andean music group. And so that's more of my lifestyle nowadays. A big part of it is being at home, taking care of the home front and cooking, cleaning and gardening, and trying to be a good partner and taking care of our animals. And yeah, that's mostly what my life is oriented around nowadays.
Sounds like a dream life, to be honest. Yes, just
It,
coming
it
into
is
the
nice.
yes, coming into the mundane and just coming, and it's like that quote that we always hear, um, before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water, and then you do the same after enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. I think that's very profound. So just to kind of come back and unpack a little bit more, when you attended your first ayahuasca ceremony, that the I would, is it fair to say, psychedelic induced psychosis, or did you have
Oh, I see.
anything before? Like, is there any sort of like a, um, did you have any, um, what would be the right way to ask you, like any challenges in your life with any mental health before?
Yeah, like any indicators or
Mm-hmm.
prior
Mm-hmm.
circumstances that would
Yeah.
make me more susceptible. No, there wasn't. I don't have any history of bipolar depression or schizophrenia or any kind of mental health
Mm-hmm.
disturbances or conditions, nor in my family that I'm aware of. And so there weren't any pre-existing kind of circumstances that led me to be concerned or apprehensive about something like this, that it could happen.
Mm-hmm.
When it happened the first time, this is interesting because that's the very question we're looking at in this webinar, is it kind of comparing the paradigms or the philosophies, the approaches of looking at circumstances like what happened to me as being induced by psychedelics, or as being something that's more of a spiritual emergency, like a spiritual life crisis. Or there's a lot of different terms nowadays in different circles or different approaches, like a kundalini awakening, people will refer to these experiences as. Um, and for me, it's really hard to say, to actually identify and sort of catalog it, how I would classify it, because I don't think ayahuasca triggered the psychosis personally. It didn't induce it. I was at a point in my life and with my relationship, my partner at the time, and just what I was going through in my life, under a lot of stress. And I was just pushed to my limit already and was at kind of that breaking point. Perhaps ayahuasca was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, or the last little drop of water that just made the made the surface tension break on, on my kind of sort of what I could handle, and push me past the limits. I think it's fair to say that it could, I don't have resistance if a clinician or a psychiatrist would classify it as psychedelic induced. psychosis, but I think that if I wouldn't have used psychosis, wouldn't have used ayahuasca, there's a chance that this type of a psychotic break or this sort of unraveling of my psyche could have taken place just because of the stress I was under and the things that I was going through in my life on a personal level. Um, it just, the circumstances all kind of came together in a very intense and particular way that the ayahuasca certainly was an important component of it. Um, I'm not going to negate that, but it was a spiritual crisis for me as well. That is just as fitting of a label for the situation.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for being open for that. It's almost like, I want to say, divinely orchestrated to get to that point. I think there is a group of people in the UK. I was looking at different webinars on people having these openings, and I think there is a book called Breaking Open, which is very similar. People having either organically, being cracked open, or while they were on psychedelics, and it doesn't matter. Like you said, it's I think it would be too reductionist to just look at it from a psychedelic-induced psychosis. Like you said, it's actually all of it, right? Past, present, what was going on for you, and then coming to the medicine at that point, which really clarifies everything. So and then, so the first time you had this experience, you stayed in it how long?
About 11 days. I
Okay,
was
so
I was in a state of, yeah, just sort of dissociative amnesia, kind of
Mhm.
wreaking havoc on those around me, causing a lot of trouble and just being very disrespectful and violent and aggressive at times as well, and just very beside myself. I was clearly,
Mhm.
something was wrong with me. I looked like I was possessed to people who were kind of caring for me and interacting with me. That's sort of how they described what they weren't in engaging with and interacting with me. There was sort of a different
Mhm.
being that they were um, interacting with. And so it was, yeah, about 11 days.
Mhm. And then did you just suddenly came back to your baseline slowly, one morning, or it was just a slow landing?
No, what happened was so I was with a contact of mine, a friend of mine, so a healer, an indigenous Shipibo man, and his brother in their village when this ceremony that I drank the ayahuasca, and during that experience, things just kind of unraveled. And so he was aware and attentive to. I already had known him for many years, and so he was aware that something was a little off, that I wasn't quite myself. And so I was doing a lot of traveling at the time. That was part of the stress I was under. And so I left his village and went to Lima. Um, and after my partner and I got to Lima, she could tell that something was really wrong. And I was already in this state of psychosis. And so after a few days trying to just rein things in and keep things under control, her with our business partner, the man who we worked with in a retreat center, that was the main kind of place where we were based, and a lot of the work that we were doing in our partnership, and was helping out in a retreat center and hosting gatherings and receiving groups to work with the medicines. And they called for help from a psychologist and a psychiatrist, just to try and make sure that I was safe, that nothing got out of control, to try and just intervene and take care of the situation. But I wasn't coming back to baseline. I wasn't coming back to myself. And so they called on actually this Shipibo man, my friend and his brother, and they came to Lima and had 2 ceremonies with me. And so they drank the medicine themselves. I didn't drink ayahuasca, but they sat with me in a house in Lima and were just trying to do like a diagnosis. What is going on? Why am I sort of not myself? Why am I out of my body, or not connected with consensus reality? and then a second ceremony and the following night in consecutive evenings to call me back to my body, to bring me back into my consciousness. And I came right back right after walking out of the room after the second ceremony. I came right back to my body. I came right back to awareness, and um, they essentially did an assessment, kind of what was going on, and they could feel that there was the presence of other plants, other spirits. There was something that was kind of imposing and trying to take over my consciousness and just getting in the way, interfering. And so they just kind of cleared that and tried to help call me back into my body, and it worked. In fact, this friend of mine had an experience when he was a young man that was not completely similar, but he was aware of this sort of thing that can happen. And he was in a state like this for several months. And so he has his own personal experience, and it's part of their culture as well. A lot of indigenous healers go through these sort of shamanic initiations, or for me, I didn't view it as that. It just was like a traumatic, scary, eye-opening, disorienting experience. I wasn't going through a process where I was trying to become a shamanic healer. I was just living my life and working with the medicines in my sincere way, trying to do my personal work and help at retreats and with my partner and just do my own spiritual development. But this situation kind of overtook me in a very intense way. And so luckily I had the support of people who, through their philosophies and through their practices and technologies and the way that they work with plant medicines and how they're able to work energetically as well. A lot of it was through the Icaros, through the songs that they work with, the vibration and the songs that they use and sing in the ceremonies. That was one of the most important things that he mentioned to me, was helpful to just kind of bring me back into my body. And so it was not like little by little. I was very lost and very adrift in an abyss, just kind of unable to find myself. And then it was through the assistance of these two brothers, these healers, that I was able to come back.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. It sounds like this is like the traditional way of working with the medicine, right? I heard so many traditional practices of where usually the healers will drink the medicine before the participant. And I know now everyone's drinking it in circles. So how did they do you remember any of it? Like what were they doing? Nothing. They just knew how to. Mm.
Yeah, no, I don't remember hardly anything. Like I said, this was dissociative amnesia for me. I was not connected with, I didn't register memories at all. I remember very few little snapshots of, just fragments of situations from those 11 days.
Mhm.
But I don't really remember much. There are little slices of memories that I do remember being in the room and sitting with them as they were drinking medicine, and kind of standing up and walking around or just interacting a little bit. But my memories, yeah, they're not coherent. They're not really aligned with anything that has a timeline that makes sense or that is cohesive with what was actually happening, or like I can't put the pieces together and line things up much. He So I've talked with him a lot through over the years, and just after this happened, as well as preparing for this webinar, I recorded an interview with him, and he sat down and talked with me for about 45 minutes. And before and after, we as well had more conversation, just kind of catching up, and him sharing reflections with me. And he said to me that the most important thing, as I mentioned, were the songs that they were singing. And his brother was doing most of the singing. His older brother is more of a traditional healer and medicine man, and he's more of an artist. And so he said he was kind of like following his brother's song, and sort of they were hacking their way through the jungle, so to speak, trying to find me and just track me down. And so he was sort of following energetically where his brother was clearing the way. And then just through his familiarity and connection with me, he was able to kind of call me back into my body. But I think a lot of what they were doing was working on a very sort of level of the spirit, level of the soul, level of just energy in a way that is hard to kind of rationally and logically understand. But I don't recall any, there wasn't any moment that I recall in the ceremony that I remember him connecting with me or being able to find my way back. It was them being able to pull me back. I don't have any recollection of that, but it was, like you said, as far as I know, very traditional in that sense. They were the ones drinking the medicine, and it has a completely different format and kind of way that it
Yeah.
connected for me to be able to find some safety and wholeness again, to be able to make it out of this experience, come out to the other side.
Wow. And was this your first ever medicine experience, or you already was drinking medicine before?
No, I had been drinking medicine quite a bit, and had been working with many different medicines. Was working
Mhm.
with cactus medicines with wachuma and peyote. I also was
Mhm.
working with a wilca snuff, or yopo, which is a DMT based
Mhm.
snuff, and those are the principal ones. But I was in a lot of ayahuasca ceremonies principally because I was working in these retreat centers and with different intentional communities and international communities, working with indigenous people and receiving tourists and guests and people wanting to get to know the medicines or go deeper in their own personal
Mhm.
healing processes. And so I was kind of working as a supporter and translator and helping in those contexts. So I had participated in a lot of ceremonies up at that point. And this was a time actually when I was in many ceremonies sort of consecutively. I didn't have a lot of rest and a lot of time to just sort of slow down and integrate. And I think that was an element of this, as I was kind of pushing
Mhm.
myself to the limit and not sleeping and resting well, not taking care of my diet, not going slow enough. I was really over overdoing it, like pushing the stimulation too far, and um, just the travels were getting to an extreme, and so that was leaving my system depleted on resources to be able to handle the intense upheaval that this brought.
Yeah. Wow. This is really helpful. Thank you so much. It's so valuable. So it just gives us an idea or the clarification that it doesn't have to be your first medicine. Some people might think, oh, so this, what I'm trying to say is that it is never guaranteed when these things can just show up. It's not because it's your first medicine or the 10th or the 20th. It's not that. It's about, I guess, it is unpredictable, and we will never know when these things can show up in a session in the person, right? um I would like to ask a question around that. Did any of your healer friends or facilitator friends mention something about this happening frequently, or is it like a rare case? This is like a rare case that they see, or they see often?
No, this is not something that any of the indigenous people, facilitators or other medicine people that I work with have seen um, at all.
Mm-hmm.
Very few cases. It does happen, but it's not, no, not something that the particular people that I had worked with had much familiarity with. It
Yeah.
was more something that they had personal experience with or someone in their own community,
Mhm.
but very little awareness of.
Mhm. Participants coming to having this experience. So, what
Right.
was the conclusion? What did they say to you? You've been somewhat initiated by the medicine or something like that. What was the outcome that
Well, this is interesting because there wasn't any real assessment or um, analysis that I was given by
Mhm.
hardly anyone. The people around me in my community and some of my friends and loved ones were more trying to push things in that regard of, okay, you just had a spiritual awakening or a life crisis or a kundalini event, or you had some sort of shamanic initiation, or you had a psychiatric breakdown, you had a
Mhm.
psychotic episode. That was more a label that came from people who were just my peers trying
Mhm.
to figure out for themselves, okay, what did you just go through? The people who are more the elders, the teachers, the facilitators, the medicine workers, the indigenous people I was in contact with, were more encouraging me to figure out what it meant for myself. They were just kind of letting it be more open-ended and allow for it to naturally kind of unfold and organically settle into place for me in a way that resonated and that allowed for it to have meaning in my own path and my own journey, which now through time, like it's been 7 years now, that has been super helpful because I think if I would have gone too far into like really identifying closely with one particular analysis or sort of um, approach to how this has to be labeled or how this has to be looked at and identified, it would have been more difficult for me to really integrate and assimilate this and work it into being a healthier thing that's a part of just what I've come to live with and who I am, how I identify with it. And I think it's really interesting the point you make that um, this can happen even after we have some experience, whether it's you've had 5 or 10 or 50 ceremonies or however long it's been that you're working with the medicine. It can be something that can come on. That's the what I have heard as well from others. Now that I've been sharing this experience a little bit more openly and publicly and gotten feedback and communication from some individuals who have gone through this, that's been the case that I've heard as well. A lot of people who have expressed concern and are curious and want to learn about what I went through are people who have never tried medicine and they're worried that this could happen. And
Mhm.
I can't say for sure that it's less likely to happen on your first time, but I do think it's probably not as common. I think if you have risk factors, if you have family history, or if there are things in your mental health that would make you more prone to undergoing something like this, that's a good thing to listen to and be
Mhm.
cautious about. It's not to disregard that. But I think the medicines have a really their own internal wisdom. A lot of teachers that I've worked with, they have
Mhm.
expressed that, and that resonates with me, is that they are wise and sentient beings. And I think that they bring to us what we can handle, and what the divine sort of timing that needs to play out for us. I do really trust that. It was hard for me to to face a lot of these things, and it felt like it was too much and a lot of times, but I do in time feel that that is um, an an adequate assessment for what my own experience has been.
Wow. Mm. Thank you for sharing. This is so valuable. So the approach that is okay, just let it unfold, let it unravel. You don't need to put it in a box and then trying to explain and figure it out, but just letting it just do its thing and just settle, right? So that's very helpful.
Absolutely.
This approach is not very common from places that I know and I come from because we always want to fix it and figure it out, right? Um, Even if you were okay with it, I'm sure your loved ones and your friends, like you said, they probably felt like they've been hanging, not knowing what's going on. Mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah, this was an interesting element in the webinar that came up in talking with some of the clinicians and the practitioners, the facilitators, is when we have fear or we're worried that there's something to fix or that there's something going wrong, it is a worse environment that we're creating. It does not helpful for the person who's going through it or for the person who's trying to support and be there. It is
Mhm.
important to trust that things are playing out just as they should. And it's
Mhm.
important to be fostering a safe environment and to be careful and, have safety in mind, but to approach things with a confidence, a trust, to approach things with an attitude of, okay, what's happening? What can we do? Not what's wrong, what
Mhm.
needs to be fixed, like you said, to not have fear. And I felt that in the people who approached me when I was in this state. Those are some of the memories that I recall, is that fear. I went after it and made it worse and amplified it. It was something that I kind of felt I wanted to attack or really accentuate and go after. It was something that I it didn't make me comfortable. It made me uneasy. And so it's, I think, really important for people who, even if it's a less extreme circumstance, somebody who's just going through a difficult ceremony, or when their session or their experience is challenging, it's important to hold space and to be there and be supportive in a way that's nurturing and instilling confidence and trust, not fear and worry and an attitude of something needing to be fixed.
Oh man, this is so powerful stuff to talk about because it is so against the grain. You see, when somebody's going through an uncomfortable process, everyone around, they drop into their own fear, and fear is contagious. It just jumps all over the place. And since you were so sensitive, I'm guessing you were really open and sensitive. You would have picked this up energetically, and it would have worsened the whole process for you, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you're spot on. That's 100% correct. It made things
Mhm.
much worse.
Yeah. So obviously, places that we come from, the Western complex mind that, we all evolved to have, is like, it is so hard to be with, let alone something like what you went through, but just on a day-to-day basis, like to be with a little bit of a discomfort, a pain or a headache or this or that, even that is so uncomfortable to be with, just to like allow it a space, just let it fall, unfold, and just, you know, unravel. We, I don't know, I don't come from those kind of backgrounds. It's always like, let's fix it, let's stop this thing, whatever's happening.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, totally. Yeah, that's really interesting that you point that out, because even those smaller scale things of
Yeah.
just on a daily level, like you say, it's the same attitude and it's amplified in those
Mhm.
spaces. I was very sensitive and just open to a lot of things, and that made it
Yeah.
much, much more challenging. And so coming at it with a consciousness and approach of acceptance and just going through things, allowing things to pass, and they always do.
Yeah. Wow.
It's a really valuable reminder.
Absolutely. And of course, having solid facilitators with field experience where they know this process and they're just kind of holding it down and really trusting, even that nervous system, energetic communication is good enough.
Mm,
Just to be around those regulated nervous systems, Uh,
absolutely.
yeah. Yeah. I also know about psychosis and organic, emergence of, had a family member, and I kind of grew up in an environment where it was quite chaotic, and I really value this trust in this process, and just kind of, it's like that, when even in a day-to-day life, in an event, a panic is like the most contagious thing among
Mm,
people. We've seen it in the pandemic, right? We've seen what happened. It was literally in the air. We could kind of like breathe in the fear, the collective fear, and all that. That is not good for us when we're such in a open, cracked, open places. Um, this is really helpful. Thank you, Lee, for confirming that, because I always want to ask people, what was going on for you? How did you perceive others in your field? You know, what were you picking up?
yeah.
How did it make you feel? Because there's the more fear or the discomfort that you pick up from the environment, the more, I guess, triggered and exacerbated.
Mm,
Yeah. Um,
absolutely.
yeah. Something, just these pointers to think about. But I want to jump back, jump forward to the second time. So you're okay now. You kind of came out of it after 11 days. That's an interesting number as well, like 11 days, which is fascinating. So then how long between the second one happened? How much time was between the two?
So between the two, there was just under 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I took about 9 months without participating in any ceremonies. I didn't do any plant medicines. So I wasn't sitting with any psychedelics or in any ceremonies like that for about 9 months. And that was the recommendation of my Shipibo friend, the indigenous contact of mine. He recommended to take several months, take time, and to just make sure that I wasn't consuming anything that would potentially push me like this again in an extreme way. And so it was very challenging for me because there are a lot of things that came up just on a personal level. And my relationship with my partner, who I was with at the time, in the retreat center where I was working, with my personal contacts and just the community, my friends, the people who were concerned about me. It was a very um, disorienting and just kind of disturbing and difficult time for me, as well as for the people around me, trying to understand what to make of this, how to support me through this, where do we go with things. And so in all that, there was a lot of shifting and just things being rearranged. And so I stepped back from everything and just kind of withdrew after spending some time in the jungle where I was living and with my partner and trying to address our issues. Taking some time not working at the retreat center, but just being there and sitting. And they were very supportive of me. I really appreciate all of the people I had around me, and I'm so thankful that I had so much support and assistance from everyone who was there, and just have mm, a lot of reason to give thanks for the people and everything that they went through trying to help me out at those times. I know it was very challenging for everyone in the community where I was. But eventually it was necessary for me to step back from my commitments I had. It didn't feel right to be working at that retreat center. It didn't feel right in my partnership with the woman I was with. I could just tell that there needed to be some big changes, there's something, there was something that was happening on a deeper level, like I mentioned earlier, and how this wasn't for me just simply psychedelic induced psychosis. This was also a matter of, I'm kind of going through a life crisis and I need to make some big changes, and spirit or the plant medicines or my higher power, something in life, my own self was kind of pointing that out to me and making it more apparent. And so I eventually went back to the US and visited family. I took some time to just step back from everything and reevaluate. And I got back more to my roots of working in nature, working with as a wildlife biologist and in permaculture and gardening. And I went and traveled and did some work in Guatemala and Mexico, and was helping out on a permaculture farm and just kind of getting my hands in the dirt and reconnecting with nature and being in community with, a lot of backpackers and like-minded people. And I ended up going to Mexico. Something called me to go to the jungle in southern Mexico, and I had a recommendation of a place that was a yoga and medicine retreat center in southern Mexico. And so I had a lot of contacts in common with the owners of this, with this property at this spiritual center. And so when I went there, I met my partner now, who we've been together for a little over 6 years. I met her there, and I was going to volunteer, same thing, to be working in permaculture and helping out at the yoga retreats and cooking and being a translator, just helping support there. And my partner is an occupational therapist. That's her background professionally in her education. And she has a lot of experience in her earlier career working with individuals with lifelong diagnoses and mental health conditions of schizophrenia and bipolar and multiple personality disorders, different mental health conditions. Um, and so she was extremely helpful in me working through and processing and just trying to come to terms with what I had been going through. So that was about 6 or 7 months after I had gone through this psychotic break that happened to me the first time in Peru. And so I had met her in that context and was working through things and just trying to process. And so I lived and worked there with her in this community. And after a few months, they had groups that would come there and do retreats working with different healers and medicine people. And there's ayahuasca and chacruna growing on the land there. We're just really thriving there. And so they would brew their own medicine, make their own medicine there, and serve medicine with different healers who would come from various traditions. And they started to invite me into ceremony to participate and drink medicine as well with them. And so I reached out to my different elders and teachers and my Shipibo friend and just asked for advice and consultation to see how they felt about it. And they encouraged me to just sort of sit with it and check in with myself and just, kind of make my own inquiry and evaluate and assess how I'm doing. But everyone was encouraging and feeling like, if I took the time to just really be grounded and working through things little by little, and if it was coming about in an organic way, not to force it. And I had a good supportive environment, was there with my partner, and was in a more settled space to be open to it. And so I did. I started to work with medicine little by little, and I didn't have any fears around it happening again. It sort of felt like this was a one-off, something that happened and was just kind of at a particular time, again, because of all these extenuating circumstances. And so I started working with medicine little by little, more and more, drinking medicine again in that community principally, and working with retreat groups and just kind of in a supportive role there. And then also more intimately, just with my partner and with the community there amongst ourselves. My partner and I ended up going to Peru for some travels right before the pandemic hit. And so when the coronavirus stuff sort of trapped us in Peru, we ended up being there for quite a bit of time. And that created another level of stressors, and just the whole process of going through that that sequence of just traumas and intensities and everything that came with that created a lot of changes for us. And so when we eventually were able to make it back to Mexico, there just was a lot of stress again and different crises coming up for me and in my partnership with her, and just things that we were facing and things I was going through on a personal level. And we were trying to figure out where we wanted to settle and be, and just finding our own home and roots and things of that nature. And so this came up again uh, right after the pandemic, and after we were coming back from Peru and settling in again in Mexico. And I was in a peyote ceremony, and it was a same sort of thing. Dissociative amnesia of just not coming back to myself after a ceremony, and being very violent and aggressive and not myself, and seemingly sort of possessed by something, just embodying a lot of strange and dark energy and being very difficult to deal with, and erratic in my behaviors. I wasn't sleeping, and just like you said, there's a lot of fear in this second circumstance, in the second episode. There weren't the elders there to be able to help me to come out of this. And so it just came down to my friends and the people in the community there and my partner principally to try and help take care of me. And so pretty much everybody else was just really scared, and that made it much worse. Most of the memories I do have from the first episode in Peru and the second episode in Mexico are memories of people being scared around me and me sort of being abrasive and being difficult, sort of on purpose, kind of going after that fear. And so it's interesting because I can't reflect on a lot of things of what was helpful for me in those moments, or what do I remember in terms of the timeline of how things played out, or I don't recall much of that. And most of the memories I do have are people being scared around me, and the paranoia and the fear, and how I sort of was creating even more difficulties that made things worse, kind of in being reactive to that fear.
Yeah.
So that was, yeah, that's the timeline of it was about 3 years in between the first episode and the second one.
And how long did the second one last?
The second one lasted just over 3 weeks, actually. It
Wow.
was a lot longer. Yes, it was much more severe. So I actually had to be, eventually I was medevaced out. There was a emergency medical flight that my family helped organize to fly me out of Mexico back to the US, back to the States. And so I was, because they didn't have the spiritual elders or indigenous wisdom keepers and medicine people to help support me and bring me back to myself and get me out of that situation. They were just trying to keep things under control and do their best. But I wasn't coming back to myself. And so I was flown back and admitted into a psychiatric system, into mental health institutions in the US. And so I had to go through that whole process and that paradigm of the allopathic Western medicine and the protocols of approaching things, like you were just saying, if you have a headache, you try and, avoid the headache and make it stop. And, if you have somebody who's going through a psychotic episode, you give them antipsychotic pills and try and fix it. And the person is I had to be restrained at times. And there was a lot
Wow.
of fear about, from people who were engaging with me and trying to take care of me, and everyone was doing their best. But the resources they had there were pharmaceuticals. They didn't know what to do. There weren't the spiritual teachers, that awareness. And the diagnosis that they gave me were all related to substance abuse and addiction, and basically bipolar, a lot of those sort of conditions that I don't think adequately represent what was going on a deeper level. It was just the closest thing that they could do. In my medical records, it says, DMT induced psychosis and ayahuasca and peyote use disorder and, addiction to psychedelics. And I don't think those are really accurate descriptions, or even very valuable and useful diagnosis for people to be working in those institutions. But it's the best that they can do with the protocols and the tools that they have. So it was a long process. It took me a little over a year and a half that I had to work with a social worker and a psychiatrist and a therapist, to be able to get out of the psychiatric system and the sort of the court orders and the different restrictions that I had, because of the circumstances that I was brought back to the US and admitted into the mental health institutions. And
Wow.
so, yeah, that's
That's a lot. Wow.
yeah.
Wow, Lee. That's a lot. And now I can understand more better that you wanted to bring this to the conversation, because when the ceremony doesn't end, it's a really beautiful project that you brought together all these speakers and healers and different perspectives, because I really see the value. I think a lot of people who are exploring psychedelic medicines, plant medicines, I think they need to hear these conversations, that there is always going to be a possibility that these things can happen. So with that said, if you were to just kind of give us an overview of the webinar, like highlights that our listeners may be interested, because is it recorded, by the way? Can we somehow access it still?
Yes, it is. It was recorded. Um, the availability for that is going to be through Maria Garnett. She was the person who co-organized this with Marie,
Mhm.
and also through the McKenna Academy. So the McKenna Academy is the group. They're a nonprofit that helped host the event and did the registration. And so that will be available as a course for people who want to do continuing education or psychedelic psychotherapy training, or just people who are interested for their own personal education. And so there will be different methods that it'll be available and accessible. That's still being worked out at this time, so I can't unfortunately provide any links, but you can find more about it on Maria Garnett's website and also on the McKenna Academy website. The registration page and the information is still there about the event. And so, yeah, a synopsis of just generally is it was basically looking at my case and what I went through, and I gave a description of the 2 episodes that I went through, and trying to compare the 2 approaches of this, looking at it through the framework of the lens of psychedelic-induced psychosis, so more of like a clinical and psychiatric framework as opposed to a spiritual emergency. So looking at things through more of like a spiritual and through the indigenous lens. We had a psychiatrist, a licensed clinical psychologist, a psychedelic assisted psychotherapy professional. Maria Garnett is a medicine facilitator, and Dennis McKenna is an ethnobotanist. And then myself, we were the 6 live presenters who were speaking. And then there were 2 indigenous elders, teachers, who were interviewed beforehand, and their interviews were shown during the seminar. One of them was the Shipibo teacher and friend who helped me and assisted me during the first episode and helped pull me out of that. And so the beginning was providing an introduction to sort of what the difference is between looking at psychedelics and plant medicines and in those frameworks through a clinical approach, as more of like the compounds and the molecules and the chemical pharmacology of it that Dennis shared about, as opposed to the indigenous practices, and looking at these things as entheogens or as plant teachers, plant medicines. Then Dr. Urissa Herman, who is a licensed clinical psychologist, she shared about what the difference is between spiritual emergency or spiritual emergence and psychedelic-induced psychosis. So how that is looked at differently by various practitioners. And she has a background working in South America in retreat centers and helping with integration and a lot of that sort of work with her clinical background, and sort of weaving that together with the indigenous practices working in a ceremonial space. And then I presented my sort of testimonial, my personal story, and sharing about a lot of the details that I just went into here with you, that you kind of guided me through, and just sort of asking similar sort of questions about what it was like for me. And then each of the other presenters reflected on things, and the videos from the interviews of the indigenous teachers just sort of provided the insights into, from each person's background, what does it look like for trying to understand, what does it look like for trying to support and help someone working through these kind of situations, whether that's from Dennis and his experience and having his own kind of psychotic break with his brother Terrence back, over 50 years ago now for him. He had his own kind of experience with sort of shamanic initiation or psychotic break. And so he gave his reflections on what that's like for him, and kind of comparing and just sharing his own personal experiences and what that's been like for him to integrate those things into his own path, and now becoming world-renowned ethnobotanist, ethnopharmacologist, and having a very storied career. And then Maria shared about her experiences, and I've known her for many years. She was actually the person who introduced me to ayahuasca and who I first drank medicine with. And her teachers were the people who received me in the first ceremonies that I did with ayahuasca, with any psychedelics. And so she also shared a lot about trying to find the intersection, looking at where we can work together, where there are overlapping and complementary elements that we can utilize to work together and find more supportive tools and approaches to help people that go through really challenging circumstances that start to push into these extremes that can be labeled as psychosis or spiritual emergency. And then there was a panel discussion, so a small group discussion conversation between the six of us, where we looked at just kind of the different things that came up during the presentations. And Maria led expressive arts therapy breakout activities for us to do creative word association and different methodologies working with the arts to try and get out of just the rational, scientific, clinical thinking, and also approach this with a little bit more holistic and just kind of getting into more the creative and artistic approach to this, to be able to process things and engage with that part of our consciousness. And so we just discussed together about the main things that came up and what we found interesting together. And then there was a Q&A. And so we had around 50 participants for the webinar who tuned in live and were there following along for the entire process. And then those people had the opportunity to ask questions. And so we had a little bit of engagement, a little over a half an hour, answering questions and dialoguing, interacting with the audience and people who were tuning in. And we had great feedback and interaction, and a lot of people really appreciating and valuing, and just seeing a lot of benefit from having more awareness of and insight into these sort of circumstances, and how we can approach this with a more effective and a more compassionate and a more an approach that's more full of opportunity for her learning, for healing, for something positive to come through these sort of circumstances, and not just someone being brought to a point of trauma and destructiveness and challenging that overwhelms, but something that can be uplifting and provide growth and transformation in a good way. And so it went amazingly, and was really great to see all the feedback and engagement from people.
Wow. That's so beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for also starting this conversation. I think it's one of the most critical things we need to talk about. I really do.
Yeah.
Would
It
you
was a real honor to be a part of it. And I can't thank Maria enough for being a big person kind of pushing this forward and organizing, and all the work she put into it, and the support of Dennis and the McKenna Academy was really fundamental. And that is the feedback I've heard from a lot of people is just the importance and the necessity for having this conversation. Is really encouraging to hear that there are people who found this valuable, and I'm more than happy to bring this forward and share about it because it's been something that I've learned and healed from in my own personal journey. And so if that can be helpful for others, then that's exactly what I'm here to share for.
Amazing. Yeah, I really appreciate that. So just to close our conversation, I want to reflect on several things. And one of them is um, from my own journey and from what I'm learning and from what I'm exploring, I realized that we need to have these conversations such as, because I know that when these medicines are becoming more mainstream, almost there is an illusion that we are fixing a symptom, like we are healing a dysfunctional symptoms and parts of us, such as like, a lot of people are coming in through the door for chronic depression, MS, cluster headaches, different things, like different, many reasons. And I always felt like these are just like the doors that we just walk through. People may just seek much more, I guess, something tangible to really help themselves. But then I think we should always bring this conversation to psychedelic exploration or plant medicine exploration, that you may be just coming for this one thing you want to fix in your life, but really this is an existential process. This is, there's once you take your first ayahuasca medicine or peyote or something else, it's almost like you are changed forever and there is no turning back. There is no, like, you need to leave behind this previous perception of who you are and your life, and the identity dissolution starts that and the more you explore it, it keeps chipping at that identity. It's a slow process for a lot of us, and then someone like you is one big process, right? So it can happen for us gradually, and then some. I mean, I had my own version of a mini um, breaking open moment as well, and luckily, I wasn't in it for too long, but I remember being very unsettled for about 6 months, like feeling very unsettled inside myself, to a point where I didn't want to close the lights and just couldn't meditate, couldn't do anything um, other than just breathe and just give it a space and just wait patiently to just land wherever I was going to land. And this has been the biggest learning. And I think you are now opening us to this kind of conversation, which is more real, more authentic, and very transparent. I think I really want our listeners to hear that this is not, this medicine space is not a healing something like a symptom health issue. This is, or a relational issue, or a mental health stuff. This is really an existential process. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think it's so important what you're sharing. Yeah, it's really beautifully put. And I think it's increasingly more and more, as you say, and a valuable and vital message for people to understand the profound depth that this can bring us towards. And sometimes we don't understand exactly at the beginning what we're getting ourselves into or what's bringing us towards that. Maybe it is just a certain symptom or difficulty we're having, but then how it can open up to a really broad and deep and profound and life-changing um, journey is so important to echo that message. I really, yeah, appreciate you speaking to that and agree 100%.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this has been one of my purposes also, to bring this conversation, this channel and this YouTube and podcast, because the reason I'm talking to you is also my passion to just bring more authentic conversations. And I think let's just grow up, be a grown up about this whole, consciousness exploration or whatever brings us to this journey, right? Let's be more mature and be more transparent about this, because in that we can learn how to hold it. We can learn
Mm,
something. Mhm.
absolutely. I love that. I love that message. Yeah, I think it's really wonderful what you're doing. I'm really, yeah, just amazed and inspired by what you're
Thank
doing
you.
and the passion that you bring to this, and yeah, the maturity and just the, like you said, transparency was an interesting word that really resonates with me that you used. And I think that's important. I want to strive to be as transparent and just and open as I can be. And obviously we need to be aware how to regulate that, and when that corresponds, and when we need to be more guarded or just take care of our own boundaries. It's important to set those boundaries, but that's part of doing this in a
Yeah.
mature way. And I think that's, yeah, it's wonderful what you're doing, and how you express that. And just, I can feel your enthusiasm, and it comes out in just the conversations that you're having. This platform that you're building is beautiful.
Thank you so much. I really, truly appreciate this. And all the best. And I'd love to keep connecting. Would love to have you back because, we want to build relationships build a community online. And I know our listeners are very curious, and I know that we get a lot of email interaction, which is a very interactive community. And I really love that. I think I really want them to know that we really value and trying to, I guess, bring all aspects of this work. There's many aspects to it, but we want to just bring it to the table and
Mm,
be able to talk about it. Mhm.
absolutely. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Lee. And of course, we will add some links and your bio, and if our listeners want to connect with you, if that's okay,
Absolutely.
in the show notes. And we will put the link from Maria's and also maybe McKenna Academy, because when this webinar becomes a training to be offered, I think highly recommended to everyone. I think everyone that, even if they're not trying to learn or practice or become a practitioner or a facilitator, I think just anyone who is exploring this space should be looking into your webinar for sure.
Mm, I appreciate you saying that and your support. It means a lot to me.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. I'm just thrilled that this is out there now.
Mm,
Mhm. All right. Thank you, Lee. All the best. And yeah, look forward to reconnecting with you soon. Let's see
yeah.
what unfolds. And thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed these conversations. Please do comment. Don't be shy, and ask questions, get in touch. Yeah, let's keep going and be part of the conversation. I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.